The soft morning light filtered through William Carter's bathroom window, casting gentle shadows across his weathered face. At 78, his dark skin bore the marks of time, each wrinkle a testament to years of struggle, perseverance, and quiet dignity. His trembling hands gripped the edges of the worn sink as he stared at his reflection, trying to gather the strength for what lay ahead. The shopping list in his pocket felt heavy, particularly those two words that always made his heart sink: adult diapers. He'd made this trip countless times before, but the weight of shame never lessened. Each visit to the store brought stares, whispers, and silent judgments that cut deeper than any physical pain. Behind him, through the half-open bathroom door, came the gentle whir of medical equipment, a constant reminder of how much life had changed. His beloved Mary, once vibrant and full of life, now lay paralyzed in their converted living room, dependent entirely on his care after a devastating spinal injury. The fall that changed everything happened 5 years ago, transforming their golden years into a daily struggle for dignity. William straightened his faded blue collar one last time, his fingers lingering on the frayed edges they couldn't afford to replace. "I'll be back soon, Mary," he called out, his deep voice carrying warmth despite his anxiety. From her hospital bed, Mary's eyes found his, those same bright, loving eyes that had captured his heart decades ago. Though she couldn't speak, her gaze conveyed volumes of love and gratitude. The walk to Simmons' store was familiar, every cracked sidewalk, every neighbor's fence, every blooming flower along the way marked a path he'd traveled for over 40 years. The morning air carried a crisp freshness that normally would have lifted his spirits, but today it did little to ease the knot in his stomach. Simmons' store stood as it always had, its weathered brick facade and slightly crooked sign a constant in their changing neighborhood. The bell above the door chimed softly as William entered, the sound echoing through the quiet aisles. Early morning meant fewer customers, which usually made these trips easier. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he made his way through the narrow aisles, his footsteps deliberately slow and measured. The personal care section seemed to mock him from afar, its shelves lined with products that reminded him of their daily struggles. William took a deep breath, reached for the package of adult diapers, and tried to ignore how loudly the plastic crinkled in his trembling hands. The checkout line appeared mercifully short, just him and one other customer. But as William approached, his heart nearly stopped. Behind him stood a police officer, his crisp uniform and polished badge gleaming under the harsh store lights. William kept his eyes down, a habit born from decades of experience, praying for a quick and quiet transaction. His prayers went unanswered. "Well, look who it is." The officer's voice cut through the store's quiet like a knife, deliberately loud and dripping with mockery. "An old black man buying diapers. Must be for himself, right? Can't even take care of himself anymore." The words struck William like physical blows. His fingers tightened around the package, knuckles straining against dark skin. The shame he'd been fighting all morning threatened to overwhelm him as other customers began to turn and stare. Growing old just to become a baby again. Huh? The officer continued, his voice growing bolder with each taunt. "It's just like you people, poor when young, weak and dependent when old." William stood frozen, eyes fixed on the floor, decades of conditioning holding his tongue. He'd faced racism throughout his life, but this public humiliation, this attack on both his race and his dignity as a caregiver, cut deeper than most. Just as the moment seemed unbearable, a clear, steady voice cut through the mockery. "Sir, that's not right, and you're not allowed to speak like that." The voice belonged to Jacob, a young black man behind the counter. His words, though not loud, carried a weight that silenced the entire store. The officer turned, his face darkening with disbelief and fury at being challenged. "What did you just say?" the officer demanded, stepping closer to the counter. Jacob met his gaze steadily. "I said you're not allowed to mock and insult others because of their age or their race. Mr. Carter deserves respect, just like anyone else in this store." The air grew thick with tension. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the young cashier and the increasingly angry officer. The store manager, Mr. Simmons, emerged from his office, his face etched with worry at the confrontation unfolding in his store. "Do you know who you're talking to?" The officer's voice dropped dangerously low. I'm a police officer. And what are you? Just a small cashier in this little store. Jacob didn't flinch. I know who you are, but that doesn't give you the right to trample on someone else's dignity. Your job is to protect the community, not to mock and humiliate the vulnerable. The officer's face contorted with rage, but something in Jacob's unwavering stance made him step back. You'll regret talking to me like that, he spat before storming out of the store, the bell above the door clanging violently in his wake. The aftermath came swiftly. Within days, Jacob lost his job, officially for damaging store relationships, but everyone knew the real reason. The officer's complaint, backed by pressure from concerned customers, had sealed his fate. William couldn't shake the guilt. The young man had lost everything for defending him, for doing what was right. When he learned that Jacob was sleeping rough, unable to find new work in their small town where word traveled fast, William knew he had to act. He found Jacob sitting on a curb outside a closed shop, his thin frame hunched against the cold. The young man's eyes, once filled with such determination, now carried a weight of exhaustion and shame. Come home with me, son, William said softly, extending his hand. Mary and I have a spare room. You shouldn't have to face this alone. Jacob hesitated, pride warring with desperation. Mr. Carter, I can't impose. You and Mrs. Carter have enough to deal with. You stood up for me when no one else would, William interrupted gently. Now let me stand up for you. That moment marked the beginning of something neither man could have predicted. Jacob moved into the Carter's modest home, and slowly, day by day, a new kind of family began to form. At first, Jacob tried to stay in the background, not wanting to burden the elderly couple. But soon he found himself helping William care for Mary, his gentle manner bringing smiles to her tired face. He fixed things around the house, tended to the small garden, and most importantly, shared the weight of responsibility that had been crushing William for so long. As the weeks passed, Jacob opened up about his own struggles, his time in the military, the wife who left him, the battle with addiction that had cost him everything. William listened without judgment, offering the kind of understanding that only comes from a lifetime of facing adversity. Together, they created routines. Mornings began with Jacob helping William prepare Mary's breakfast. Afternoons often found them in the garden, William sharing stories of his youth while Jacob worked the soil. Evenings were spent in comfortable silence, the three of them watching television or simply enjoying each other's company. Jacob found strength in their acceptance. With William's encouragement, he began attending support meetings for his addiction. The same determination that had made him stand up to the officer now fueled his recovery. Slowly, steadily, he rebuilt his life. A job at the local community center came next, maintenance work that utilized his military training. The position didn't just provide income, it gave Jacob purpose. He discovered a talent for connecting with troubled youth, his own experiences helping him understand their struggles. William watched with quiet pride as Jacob flourished. The young man who had defended his dignity that day in the store had become like a son to him and Mary. Their home, once heavy with the weight of illness and obligation, now rang with laughter and conversation. Mary, though still unable to speak, communicated volumes through her expressive eyes. She beamed whenever Jacob was around, her face lighting up at the sound of his voice. The bond between them grew strong, built on gentle kindness and understanding. One evening, as they sat together in the garden watching the sunset, William turned to Jacob. You know, son, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you're not just staying here anymore. You're family. Jacob's eyes glistened. Thank you, Mr. Carter. You and Mrs. Mary, you gave me more than a home. You gave me hope when I thought I'd lost everything. The years that followed brought their own challenges, but they faced them together. When William's arthritis made it harder to care for Mary, Jacob was there. When Jacob struggled with sobriety, William's quiet strength helped him through. They became more than caregiver and guest, more than friends. They became family in the truest sense. Their story spread through the community, changing hearts and minds. The officer who had tried to humiliate William eventually transferred to another precinct, but the impact of that day lingered. People began to see that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the connections we forge in our darkest moments, about the courage to stand up for others, and about the healing power of accepting people into our hearts when they need it most. In their small home, they created something remarkable. A sanctuary where dignity, respect, and love flourished. Jacob's presence made William and Mary's final years richer, fuller, filled with the joy of having a son they never expected. And Jacob found what he'd been searching for his whole life: a place to belong, people to love, and the peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most beautiful healing. That in our most vulnerable moments, unexpected heroes can emerge. That one act of courage, one moment of standing up for what's right, can create ripples that transform lives forever. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that family isn't defined by blood or background, but by the connections we choose to nurture, the love we choose to give, and the dignity we choose to defend in others. In a world often divided by fear and prejudice, their story stands as a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring strength of love. Years later, when people would ask Jacob why he risked everything that day to defend a stranger, his answer remained the same. Sometimes standing up for what's right isn't a choice, it's a responsibility. And sometimes that one moment of courage can lead you exactly where you need to be. For William, Mary, and Jacob, that moment in a small-town store became the foundation of something beautiful. A family bound not by blood, but by choice, understanding, and unconditional love. Their story continues to inspire others, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, hope can find us in the most unexpected ways, and family can form in the most surprising places.